The folder was starting to bend at the corner. Ryan Cole noticed it in the elevator mirror, the cream-colored portfolio he'd bought at Walgreens 2 nights ago, the one he'd spent 40 minutes deciding on because it cost $4.99, and he only had $11 left until Friday. The corner had folded over at some point during the bus ride, giving it the look of something already surrendered to time. He straightened it with his thumb, pressing the crease flat with the kind of careful attention a man gives to the last decent thing he owns. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby of Brentwood Tower, and the cold air hit him with the particular aggression of corporate air conditioning, the kind calibrated not for comfort, but for a statement. Ryan adjusted the knot of his tie. He'd borrowed the tie from his neighbor, Dennis, a retired schoolteacher who smelled of pipe tobacco and kept his wardrobe organized by decade. The tie was navy with small diagonal stripes, conservative and clean. Dennis had tied it for him that morning while Lily watched from the kitchen doorway, eating cereal from a bowl she'd already filled herself because she understood that mornings like this required her to be small and helpful. She was 6 years old and already knew how to read the room. Ryan had worked in logistics coordination for 7 years before the company downsized. That was 14 months ago. Since then, he'd patched together income through freelance project management, helping small contractors track timelines, manage subcontractors, coordinate deliveries. It paid inconsistently and required him to wear many hats, none of which fit quite right. The rent on their 2-bedroom apartment in Millhaven had gone up twice. Lily's school required a supply fee he'd paid 2 weeks late. The car had been sold 8 months ago, which is why he rode the 7:40 bus with a bent portfolio folder and a borrowed tie. The interview at Carver and Mitchell Group was for a senior logistics coordinator, position the exact title he'd held at his previous job, with slightly better pay and, more importantly, benefits that would cover Lily's upcoming dental work. He'd applied 3 weeks ago, revised his resume 4 times based on feedback from a career counselor he'd found through a community center program, and received the call on a Wednesday afternoon that made him stand very still in the middle of the kitchen and say, out loud to no one, "Thank you." He'd told Lily about it that evening. "Will you wear a tie?" she'd asked. "Probably. Can I come?" He'd explained that interviews were things adults did alone, in buildings with glass fronts. She'd accepted this with the pragmatic grace that 6-year-olds occasionally produce without warning. But that morning, when he was putting on his shoes, she'd appeared at the bedroom door holding a drawing she'd made the night before, 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of what appeared to be a large building. The tall figure was labeled DAD in large uppercase letters. Underneath, she'd written, "You will do good." He'd folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. The lobby of Brentwood Tower had marble floors and a security desk staffed by a man who looked at Ryan with the mild, practiced skepticism of someone who evaluated visitors by the quality of their shoes. Ryan's shoes were polished but old. He gave his name. He was directed to the 11th floor. He thanked the man. In the elevator, a woman in a cashmere blazer was answering emails on her phone without looking up. A man in his 50s stared at his own reflection and straightened his lapel. Ryan looked at the bent corner of his folder and thought, 11 floors. 11 floors and then the rest of your life. The elevator stopped on the 3rd floor. The doors opened and Ryan saw, through the lobby window that faced the street, a small park, really just a strip of grass and 2 benches along the sidewalk outside the building. It was late September. The trees had gone copper and amber, and the morning light was the particular pale gold of early fall. A woman was sitting on the closer bench. Then she wasn't sitting. She was on the ground. Ryan watched it happen, the slow sideways listing, the arm that didn't reach out in time, the stillness that followed. He watched the people on the sidewalk part around her like water around a stone. A man in a suit glanced down, slowed his pace, kept walking. A woman with a dog pulled the leash and moved to the other side of the path. Nobody stopped. The elevator doors began to close. Ryan put his hand out. He had 11 minutes. That was the number he'd committed to memory on the bus. 11 minutes of buffer between his arrival and the scheduled start of the interview. Enough to find the bathroom, splash water on his face, Review the 3 questions he'd prepared about company growth and team structure. Not enough for anything else. He stood with his hand on the elevator door frame and looked through the lobby window at the woman on the ground. She wasn't moving. She was on her side, one arm beneath her, dressed in a gray coat that had ridden up when she fell. Her bag was still on the bench. She looked like she was in her 60s, maybe early 70s. She looked like someone's mother. She looked like she might be dying. The security guard at the desk had his back turned, speaking into a phone. The man who'd been in the elevator stepped off at the ground floor and walked directly to the revolving door without looking left. Ryan looked at the elevator panel. Floor 11. Then he looked at his watch. Then he looked at the woman who hadn't moved. The calculation didn't take as long as he thought it would. He stepped out of the elevator. He crossed the lobby at a pace that was controlled and deliberate. The kind of pace that comes from making a decision and committing to it before the second guessing can catch up. He pushed through the revolving door and crossed the 4 steps of landscaped plaza and crouched down beside the woman on the ground. Up close, she was older than he'd estimated. Her hair was silver and cut short. Her breathing was shallow but present. He could see the slight rise and fall of her chest. Her face had the pallor of someone who had been ill for a while, rather than someone who had simply tripped. There was no blood. Her eyes were closed. "Ma'am," Ryan said, "can you hear me?" Nothing. He checked her pulse at the wrist, something he'd learned in a first aid course he'd taken years ago because his company had required it and he'd actually paid attention. The pulse was there but weak. Her skin was cold. He looked around. A young woman with headphones around her neck had slowed to a stop a few feet away. "Call 911, Ryan said. She blinked. "Please. Call 911, right now. Tell them a woman is unconscious at the corner of Brentwood and Archer. Outside Brentwood Tower. Tell them she has a weak pulse." The woman nodded and pulled out her phone. Ryan turned back. He placed his portfolio folder on the bench to free his hands. He loosened the woman's collar slightly. There was a scarf that had bunched up around her throat, and he eased it back. He positioned himself so that he could monitor her breathing and keep her from rolling further. He talked to her in a low, even voice, not because he thought she could hear him, but because it helped him stay calm, and because it seemed like the right thing to do. "Help is coming," he said. "Just stay with me." He checked his watch once, then he didn't check it again. Her name, he would learn later, was Irene Harlow, but that morning, in those 22 minutes between when Ryan crouched beside her and when the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, she was simply the woman with silver hair and cold hands and a faint, stubborn pulse. The woman who had fallen while the city walked around her. The paramedics arrived efficiently. Ryan answered their questions what he'd observed. When she fell, whether she'd said anything, he showed them where he'd loosened the scarf. One of the paramedics nodded with the brief, professional approval of someone who recognized competent bystander response. They worked quickly. Before they closed the ambulance doors, one of them paused. "You family?" she asked. "No," Ryan said. "I was just walking by." The paramedic nodded once, and the doors closed. Ryan stood on the sidewalk with his portfolio in his hand. He looked at his watch. The interview had started 19 minutes ago. He looked at the space where the ambulance had been. The young woman with the headphones was gone. Most of the gathered onlookers had dispersed. The bench where the woman had been sitting held only a small leather purse, which the paramedics had taken as part of her effects. Ryan took a breath. He walked to the building entrance, gave his name to the security guard again, rode the elevator to the 11th floor, and told the receptionist at Carver and Mitchell Group that he'd been delayed by an emergency on the street and asked if it was possible to reschedule. The receptionist, a young man named Marcus, according to his nameplate, looked genuinely sorry. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Cole," he said. "They've already moved on. The hiring manager has back-to-back meetings through Thursday. I don't think there's flexibility this week." Ryan nodded. "I understand," he said. "Thank you." He rode the elevator back down. He walked through the lobby. He pushed through the revolving door into the September air and stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside Brentwood Tower, portfolio in hand, tie still straight. He thought about Lily, about the drawing in his jacket pocket, about the dental appointment in November. Then he walked to the bus stop and sat down on the bench and waited. The 12:15 bus was less crowded than the morning one. Ryan sat by the window and watched the city go by the dry cleaner, the pharmacy, the elementary school with its chain-link fence and hand-painted banner for fall carnival. He thought about calling the career counselor at the community center. He thought about which of his current freelance clients might have additional work. He thought about a staffing agency he'd seen advertised near the library. He did not let himself think about the look on Lily's face when she asked how it went. He got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way, the slow route that went past the park with the duck pond where he took Lily on Sunday afternoons. The ducks were still there. A man in a lawn chair was feeding them torn bread. Ryan stopped for a moment at the fence and watched them, not because it helped, but because it was something to do before going home. Lily was at school until 3. He had until 3. He made coffee when he got home, changed out of the dress shirt, and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He pulled up his email to begin the process: job boards, follow-up applications, a note to Marcus at Carver and Mitchell, asking politely if there was any possibility of a future opening. Then he opened a browser tab and spent 20 minutes searching for information about what he should do if he ever encountered someone in a medical emergency again, whether he'd done the right things, whether there was something more he could have done. The search told him he had done everything correctly. He closed the laptop. He took the drawing out of his jacket pocket and smoothed it on the table. 2 stick figures, one tall and one small. "You will do good." He looked at it for a while. Then he put it on the refrigerator, with a magnet shaped like a lobster from a family trip to Maine that felt very far away now. At 2:45 he walked to school. Lily came through the double doors at 3, wearing her yellow backpack and looking for him with the searching, particular focus of a child who needs to locate a specific person before they can relax. When she saw him, she broke into a run. The way 6-year-olds run, full commitment. No conservation of energy. Backpack bouncing. She did not ask about the interview until they were a block from home. He knew she was working up to it. "How was it?" she said. Ryan took her hand. "I didn't get to do it," he said. "A woman fell down on the street. I had to help her, and by the time the ambulance came, the interview was over." Lily was quiet for a moment. Her hand was warm and small in his. "Is she okay?" she asked. "I think so. The paramedics came." Another pause. "So you helped her?" "Yeah." "Then you did the right thing," Lily said, with the simple, complete certainty of a child who has not yet learned to qualify her convictions. Ryan said nothing. "You did," she said, and looked up at him. "Right?" "Yeah," he said. "I think so." They walked the last half-block home in the amber light of late afternoon. And she told him about her day, the science project about cloud formations, the girl named Sophie, who had the same lunchbox, the song they were learning for the school concert in December. He listened and responded, and asked the right follow-up questions. And by the time they reached the apartment door, he had put the interview away in the part of his mind reserved for things he could not change. His phone was on the kitchen table where he'd left it. It hadn't rung all afternoon. That evening was quiet, in the ordinary way of evenings that have absorbed difficult things. Ryan made pasta with jar sauce and frozen broccoli, which Lily ate without complaint, and sometimes even with enthusiasm, depending on the ratio of pasta to broccoli. He read to her from a chapter book about a girl who discovers her grandmother is a lighthouse keeper, which they'd started 3 weeks ago and were now halfway through. At 8:15 she was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his laptop and worked for 2 hours on a deliverables spreadsheet for one of his freelance clients, a small plumbing contractor in Millhaven who was expanding and needed someone to track material orders and subcontractor schedules. The work paid $18 an hour and came in irregularly. But the contractor, a man named Gerald, was reliable and communicated clearly and always paid within a week. At 10 o'clock, Ryan closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen quiet. The phone had not rung. He wasn't expecting it to. The interview was over. The decision had been made. What he had instead was a plumbing contractor's spreadsheet, a borrowed tie hanging on the back of a chair, and the knowledge that he had made the choice he would have made regardless, and that this knowledge was both entirely sufficient and entirely insufficient. He thought about the woman. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she was recovered, or in the hospital, or home with her family. He had no way to know. He went to bed at 10:30. He lay in the dark for a while, and thought about nothing in particular, which is sometimes the only available option. The next morning was a Thursday. Ryan made oatmeal and helped Lily find her left shoe, which had ended up beneath the couch in a way that defied casual explanation. He walked her to school, came home, made more coffee, and opened his laptop to continue the spreadsheet. At 9:17, his phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. He answered with the mild wariness of someone accustomed to debt collection calls and political surveys. "Is this Ryan Cole?" A woman's voice, professional and precise. "Yes, Mr. Cole. My name is Patricia Webb. I'm calling on behalf of Harlow Capital Group. I'm looking for the individual who assisted a woman on the street outside Brentwood Tower yesterday morning." Around 9 a.m., Ryan was quiet for a moment. "That was me," he said. A brief pause on her end, the kind that indicated she was either surprised or writing something down. "Mr. Cole, I'd like to speak with you further if you're available. Would you be free for a brief call this afternoon?" He said he would. She said she'd call at 2. After the call ended, Ryan sat with his phone in his hand for a moment. He thought about the woman. He thought about the leather purse on the bench. Then he put the phone on the table and went back to the spreadsheet. At 11:15, a different number called. This one was a 212 area code, New York. "Mr. Cole, this is Graham Sellers with Meridian Group. I'm calling regarding." Ryan listened, wrote down the name, said he was available. At 12:40, an email arrived from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, Thursday morning, Brentwood Tower. The body was 3 sentences. Professional. Requesting a meeting. At 1:15, his phone rang twice in quick succession, 2 numbers he didn't know, both leaving voicemails. Ryan made a sandwich and ate it at the kitchen table looking at his phone. He had the strange, disorienting feeling of watching a story shift direction, not dramatically, not with sirens and spotlights, but the way weather changes in fall, gradually, then all at once. He called Lily's school to make sure she had the after-school program option covered. Then he listened to both voicemails. Then he sat back in his chair. Patricia Webb called at exactly 2 o'clock. She was organized and brief. She confirmed that Ryan was the man who had stopped to assist Irene Harlow outside Brentwood Tower on the morning of September 24th. She explained that Miss Harlow had been discharged from Millhaven General that morning following treatment for a cardiac episode, not a full cardiac arrest, but a significant arrhythmia event that had required intervention. The physician had confirmed that the positioning and timing of bystander response had likely prevented the situation from becoming substantially worse. "Miss Harlow would like to meet with you," Patricia said. "Is she all right?" Ryan asked. Brief pause. "She's recovering well," Patricia said. "She's quite determined." He thought about the woman on the ground, the silver hair, the stubborn pulse. He believed it. "I'm available," he said. Patricia arranged a meeting for Friday morning at 10, not at a corporate headquarters, but at a townhouse address in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood that Ryan recognized as one of the older, quieter residential streets in the city. The kind of address where trees grew over the sidewalk and the houses had been in families for 50 years. After the call, Ryan looked up Harlow Capital Group. He spent 40 minutes reading. Harlow Capital was a private investment firm founded in 1989. It managed assets across real estate, infrastructure, and private equity. It had offices in Boston, New York, and London. Its founder and managing director was Irene Harlow, 67, who had spent the first decade of her career as an engineer before pivoting to finance, who had been described in a profile he found in a business journal as methodical, unsentimental, and constitutionally allergic to the performative. The profile was from 6 years ago. There was one photograph. A woman at a conference table. Silver, haired, looking directly at the camera with the measured gaze of someone who had been photographed enough times to decide she didn't need to perform for it. Ryan recognized the face. He sat back and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he looked at his phone. 3 calls from Carver and Mitchell Group in the past 4 hours, including one from a number his search identified as the direct line of the hiring manager. 2 emails, one marked urgent. He set the phone face down on the table. He would figure out what any of it meant after he knew what Irene Harlow wanted to say. By Friday morning, Ryan had 11 missed calls he hadn't returned. 7 were from Carver and Mitchell Group, spanning from Thursday afternoon through Friday at 8 a.m. 2 were from the Meridian Group contact, Graham Sellers. 1 was from a number that turned out, when he looked it up, to belong to a staffing firm he'd applied to 4 months ago and heard nothing from. The last one was from Patricia Webb, confirming Friday's meeting and asking if he needed parking information. He did not have a car, so he did not need parking information. He took the bus to Chestnut Hill. The neighborhood was as he remembered it from the occasional errand to its edge-wide sidewalks, mature oaks, brick facades with window boxes still holding late-season flowers. He walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to the address Patricia had given him, carrying nothing. No portfolio, no folder. He'd left the borrowed tie at home. The townhouse was brick, 4 stories, with a black iron gate and a small garden that had been put to bed for the fall bare-stemmed roses, turned earth, a pair of pruned hydrangeas. The gate was open. He rang the bell. A man in his 40s answered, not a butler, nothing so formal, just a man in a good sweater who introduced himself as Daniel and who clearly worked for Irene in some capacity that didn't require a title in the greeting. He took Ryan's coat and led him down a hallway lined with framed architectural drawings to a sitting room at the rear of the house that overlooked a small walled garden. Irene Harlow was in an armchair by the window. She looked different than she had on the sidewalk. She was dressed gray trousers, a cream blouse, a cardigan, the color of charcoal. Her posture was upright in the way of someone who had been told to rest and had decided to comply minimally. She had reading glasses on top of her head and a cup of tea on the table beside her that looked untouched. She looked at Ryan when he entered the room with an expression of alert, comprehensive attention, the way a person looks when they are genuinely seeing you, which is rarer than it sounds. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat. "You missed your interview," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I know what it was for." Patricia looked into it. Carver and Mitchell, senior coordinator position. She picked up the tea, decided against it, set it back. "I'm sorry for that. It was my choice," Ryan said. "I know it was." She looked at him steadily. "That's what I wanted to talk about." Irene Harlow spoke carefully and without preamble, in the manner of a person who had spent a long career in rooms where imprecision was expensive. She told him that she'd been walking from a breakfast meeting to a property site 3 blocks north. She walked to morning meetings when the weather allowed, a habit she'd maintained for 30 years. She had been managing a cardiac condition for the past 18 months that she described as inconvenient but not disqualifying. That morning it had apparently decided to disagree with her assessment. "I was aware for approximately 8 seconds, she said. "I know that I was on the ground. I know I heard a voice. Then I didn't know anything until I was in the ambulance." Ryan said nothing. "The paramedic briefed me when I was stable enough to receive information," she continued. "She told me that a man had been there when she arrived, that he'd positioned me correctly, monitored my breathing, and kept the scene calm, that he'd answered every question they asked clearly and then stepped away without being asked, because he understood that his job was done." She paused. She said it the way you say something when you want the other person to understand that it matters. Ryan looked at his hands. "Patricia found you through the building's exterior cameras," Irene said. "We have your name from the receptionist at Carver and Mitchell. Marcus, apparently, remembered you quite clearly. He said you thanked him before you left. He was kind about it," Ryan said. "He was." A brief silence. "You have a daughter, Lily, 6. Irene nodded once, as if this confirmed something she'd already worked out. "I'm not going to make a large gesture," she said. "I don't find them useful. and I don't think you'd respond well to one. I'm going to say two things, and then I'd like you to respond honestly, because I've been doing this long enough to know that people tell you what they think you want to hear, and I'd like to try something different. Ryan looked up. The first thing, she said, is that what you did was not small. Not because I was the one on the ground, or because of who I am professionally, or any of that. What you did was choose, under real pressure, to see someone as more important than your own immediate need. That's rarer than it should be. And I want you to know that I know it. He didn't say anything. The second thing, she said, is that I have a need in my organization. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you an evaluation, a 4-week contract, project-based, coordinating an infrastructure due diligence project that one of my portfolio companies is conducting. It requires someone who can manage timelines, communicate across teams, and handle uncertainty without losing the thread. Patricia tells me your background is logistics coordination. She paused. Is that accurate? 7 years, Ryan said. Before the layoff. What have you been doing since? He told her. The freelance work, the contractors, the spreadsheets. He told her about Gerald and the plumbing company. He did not make it sound better than it was, and he did not make it sound worse. She listened with complete attention. 4 weeks, she said when he'd finished. The rate is $65 an hour. Project hours. If it goes well, we talk about something permanent. If it doesn't, you walk away with 4 weeks of pay and a reference from me, which is, she said it with the faintest dryness, not without value. Ryan was quiet for a moment. What are the hours? He said. She looked at him with a slight expression he couldn't fully read. Flexible, she said. Patricia will work around school pickup. He said, Can I have a day to think about it? She said, Yes. And that was the meeting. He took the bus home. He picked up Lily at school at 3. She asked about his morning, and he told her he'd had a meeting, and she accepted this because the word meeting carried a satisfying professional weight for a 6-year-old. They stopped at the park on the way home, the one with the duck pond, and sat on the bench and watched the ducks, who were preoccupied with a piece of bread that a toddler in a red hat was throwing too enthusiastically. Are ducks friends with each other? Lily asked. I think some of them are, Ryan said. How do you know which ones? They stay close when they don't have to. Lily thought about this. The toddler in the red hat threw another piece of bread, and 3 ducks converged on it with notable competitive energy. That doesn't look very friendly, she said. Bread complicates things. She laughed, the quick bright laugh that came when he surprised her with something she found genuinely funny. He put his arm around her on the bench, and she leaned in the way she did completely, without reservation, with the full weight of her 6-year-old confidence that he would hold it. He thought about the 4-week contract. He thought about $65 an hour and what that would mean over 4 weeks of reasonable hours. He thought about Patricia working around school pickup. He thought about the reference that was not without value. He thought about the look on Irene Harlow's face when she said, What you did was not small. He thought about the elevator, and the moment the doors had started to close, and the choice he'd made before he'd fully made it. He didn't regret it. He hadn't regretted it the whole time. He'd been sad about it, practical about it, clear-eyed about what it cost, but he hadn't regretted it. And he thought that this was significant information about who he was and what he could be trusted to do when the moment was small and unobserved and entirely his. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. Are you thinking? A little. About what? A job, he said. A real one. Maybe. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. The lady you helped, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the direct, clear eyes of a child who had followed the whole arc of the story and arrived at the logical conclusion. Yeah, he said. She nodded slowly. That makes sense, she said. And then, can we get hot chocolate on the way home? He said yes. On Monday morning, Ryan put on the dress shirt again. Not the borrowed tie, he'd returned that to Dennis on Saturday, along with 2 of Dennis's books he'd borrowed in the spring. Dennis had made coffee, and they'd talked for 20 minutes about the World Series, which neither of them cared about particularly. but which provided the comfortable conversational structure that men like Dennis found useful between deeper topics. He wore a different tie, his own, dark green, from the back of the closet where it had been hanging since his last job. It had a small stain near the bottom that didn't show when tucked. He left the portfolio folder at home. He walked Lily to school. At the corner before the school gate, she stopped and turned around and looked at him. "You look good," she said. "Thank you. Are you nervous?" He thought about it. "A little," he said, "but not the bad kind." She seemed to understand what he meant. She turned back toward the school gate, then stopped once more. "The lady," she said. "Is she nice?" "I think she's honest," Ryan said. "Which is better?" Lily considered this. Then, "Okay. Good luck." And she went through the gate. He took the bus to the address Patricia Webb had sent him, not the Chestnut Hill townhouse, but an office building in the Whitmore district, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and large windows, and the particular low-grade energy of a place where actual work happens as opposed to being performed. Patricia met him in the lobby. She was in her early 50s, efficient and brisk, and she showed him to a workspace on the second floor, an open desk with a good monitor, positioned near a window that looked out over a narrow street where someone had planted a row of young maples. She explained the project. A portfolio company was evaluating an infrastructure acquisition and needed a 4-week sprint of due diligence, coordination timelines, document management, communication between the legal, financial, and engineering teams. She gave him access credentials and a project brief and said she'd check in at end of day. She answered 3 of his questions, told him where the coffee was, and left him to it. He read the project brief. He made a list. He opened the project management software and began building the timeline structure he could see clearly. In his head, the dependencies, the gates, the communication nodes that would prevent information from pooling in one place while other teams waited. He had done this before, for 7 years. And the work came back to him the way a physical skill comes back, not perfectly, but with the ease of something that was always there. Waiting. At 12:30, he ate a sandwich he'd packed at the desk and responded to 2 emails. At 2:15, Patricia stopped by and looked at his screen. She was quiet for a moment. "Irene will want to see this structure," she said. "If it's useful," Ryan said. "It's very useful." He went back to the timeline. At 3:15, he saved his work, logged off, and took the bus to school. He was at the gate at 3:34, which was 4 minutes late because the bus had caught a light. But Lily was still in the after-school group in the gym, playing some form of organized chaos with beanbags, and when she saw him, she jogged over with the beanbag still in her hand. "How was it?" she said. "Good," he said. "I think good. Did you use the computer?" "Yes." "Did the computer work?" "Very well." She handed him the beanbag, a formality, a completion, and he handed it to the aide at the door. And they walked out into the October afternoon, which had gone sharp and bright, with the particular clarity of a fall day after rain, the kind of day where the air seems freshly made. The 4 weeks passed in the way that good work passes fully, without waste. Ryan rebuilt his capacity to inhabit a professional space. Not the anxious, effortful occupancy of the past 14 months, but the settled presence of a person who knows what they're doing and is trusted to do it. He learned the rhythms of the team he was coordinating. The engineer who needed visual timelines, the lawyer who needed written summaries, the financial analyst who needed both and would still email separately to confirm. He adapted. He saw Irene Harlow twice in those 4 weeks, once in a brief hallway exchange where she asked one specific question about the timeline gate structure and listened to his answer with complete attention and then said good and moved, "On," and once at the end of week 3 when she sat in on a team check-in and said nothing for 40 minutes, and then, afterward, stopped at his desk. "The legal team has stopped missing handoffs," she said. "I put the summary format in a template," Ryan said, "so they don't have to reconstruct it each time." "Who taught you that?" "I worked it out on my first real job." She looked at him for a moment. "So are you," she said, and walked on. On a Thursday in mid-October, he got a call from Carver and Mitchell Group, not the 8th call in a string of increasingly urgent messages. but a new call from the hiring manager herself, a woman named Sandra Briggs, who introduced herself and apologized professionally and asked whether he might be interested in reconsidering. Ryan thanked her and said he was currently under contract and asked if he could follow up in 2 weeks. She said of course. He did not, in the end, need to. At the end of week 4, Patricia Webb called him into a conference room. Irene was there, along with a man Ryan hadn't met mid-40s, introduced as Thomas Carr, head of portfolio operations. The conversation was direct and not long. They described a permanent role, logistics and operations coordinator for the portfolio group, coordinating across the infrastructure and real estate holdings. Flexible hours, structured around his availability. Benefits effective 90 days in. Ryan asked about the dental plan. Thomas Carr said it was comprehensive. Ryan said he'd like to think about it overnight. Nobody in the room seemed surprised. Irene, he thought, might even have been pleased. That evening, he walked Lily to the duck pond. It was later now, almost 5. The light going amber low. The ducks less interested in people and more focused on their own settling routines. The toddler in the red hat was nowhere to be seen. An older man sat on the far bench, reading. Lily climbed up to sit on the back of their bench, feet dangling, which was technically not allowed but which the park did not enforce rigorously. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The job," Ryan said. "The one you might keep?" "Yeah." "Are you going to?" He looked at the ducks. One of them, a mallard with an iridescent head, was making a slow circuit of the pond's edge with the purposeful air of a duck that had somewhere specific to be. "I think so," he said. "Good," she said. "You're not going to ask about the details?" "I don't care about the details," she said, with the cheerful authority of a 6-year-old who has correctly identified what is and isn't her area of jurisdiction. "I just want to know if it's going to be okay." "I think it is," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and looked at the ducks. He looked at the park, the path, the trees, the October light going long and lateral across the grass, and thought about the morning 7 weeks ago, when he'd stood in the lobby of Brentwood Tower with a bent folder and 11 minutes and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all, because it was the only one available to the person he actually was. He hadn't known it would lead here. He hadn't made the choice because of what might follow. He'd made it because a woman was on the ground, and the people around her were walking, and he was the kind of man who stopped. This was not, he thought, a small thing to know about yourself. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah. There's a duck looking at us." He looked. The mallard had paused in its circuit and was standing at the pond's edge, head tilted, regarding them with the mild philosophical interest that ducks occasionally bring to the observation of humans. "What do you think it wants?" Lily said. "Nothing, probably," Ryan said. "I think it's just looking." "That's okay too," she said. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. The duck, after a moment, resumed its circuit. The light went slower and lower and gold across the water, and they stayed until it was almost gone. And then they walked home in the early dark. And Ryan held her hand. And she talked about clouds.